This is Devin writing daily with me every single day. I don't even know why I chose every day, but I'm doing it every single day. So we get together, we talk about writing for writers, about writing, to write more, to write better, to get in touch with the stuff that is no, don't write. And we try to do it all. But today I have a very special guest. I mentioned it yesterday. Gayle Brandeis, who was a friend, a mentor, a crazy talented writer. I am reading her book as we speak right now. It's absolutely wonderful. And I have Gayle with me today. How are you, Gayle? Thanks for being here.
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here, Devin. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh wow. I mean, like really, like I'm crazy impressed by you as a rule. And so just so for those who are not familiar with you, Gayle Brandeis is an author of the memoir, The Art of Misdiagnosis, Surviving My Mother's Suicide, the poetry collection, The Selfless Bliss of the Body, the craft book, Fruit Flesh, Seeds of Inspiration for Women Who Write, and several novels, including the Book of Dead Birds, which won the Bellwether Prize for Fiction of Social Engagement. She teaches at Sierra Nevada College and Antioch University, Los Angeles, which was my alma mater. Yeah. You are totally a rock star. I mean, really, like crazy. So just to start with, you write nonfiction, you write fiction, and you write poetry. Mm-hmm. And that, I think for many writers, I think we all want to aspire to do that thing, but I think a lot of writers don't. Did you ever have any issues by just going like, I'm these things, I'm writing cross genre all the time? How does that manifest in your writing and in your life?
I've been writing in all genres since I was a child, so it's just been part of my writing path. I wrote my first poem when I was 4, and I just kind of kept going from there. I wrote little stories as a kid, but I also put together a neighborhood newspaper as a kid, and sold subscriptions door to door. I was really shy, but if I did anything that was in service to my writing, I would feel braver. And that's still the case now. I feel the most brave, I think, when I'm writing, because I'm still a pretty quiet person. But when I write, I can be anything. And so I love that writing is a way to explore the world inside me, but also the world outside of me. And sometimes a poem is the right form for capturing what I need to capture. Sometimes a story is the right form, but sometimes I need to dig into my own life and write an essay, or, you know, in this case, a memoir, which was really the hardest and most necessary thing I've ever written.
I absolutely want to talk about the memoir and the importance of writing it. During your sort of, just writing whatever you feel in terms of genre, did you ever have anybody tell you not to do that, or to focus on one particular format or another?
I'm lucky that I haven't had too many people tell me that, although I did have one person many years ago say that I was being a dilettante by jumping around between genres, and that clearly I wasn't, and this person hadn't even read my work, so they weren't coming from a very informed perspective, but they just assumed that I wasn't studying craft because I was writing in these different genres. But that's not the case. I love craft. I love studying form. For a while, I was focused mainly on poetry throughout high school and college. My undergraduate degree is in poetry and movement. And so I dug really deeply into poems. I decided to go back and get my MFA when we met at Antioch, years ago, because these novels started pouring out of me and I didn't know how to revise them. I could revise, a poem that's about this big. I knew the tools to revise a poem, but I had no idea how to revise 300 pages of story. And so I decided to delve into the craft of fiction really deeply, which I did as well. And nonfiction, I've been studying craft, really thoroughly too. And so I think as long as you're serious about what you're doing, but also playful about what you're doing, there's no need to put ourselves into boxes. I think that writing, for me, it knows more than I do. And sometimes it knows that it wants to be a poem. Sometimes it knows it wants to be an essay. Sometimes it takes me a while to figure out what the right form is for any given piece. But it was really gratifying. I was recently named the Willamette Writers multi-genre maverick writer. so that's cool. I like being called a maverick, although not in a Sarah Palin way, but but it's nice to be honored for writing in these different genres, and to be given that recognition that it's not just something I'm flitting around between. I'm taking each genre very seriously.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you're just simply a talented writer. And I think when you were describing your childhood as, you're going door to door selling newspapers, your own newspapers. By the way, I love that story. Was there a point? I mean, for me, it really took a long period of time to kind of say, okay, I'm a writer. This is something that I do, and it's meaningful to me, and it's important. And I've been writing professionally for a long time. You have as well. Was there ever a point where there was a lot of self-doubt, or you had questions?
Oh, yeah. It's been with me along the path. Self-doubt is, I think, sadly an integral part of the writing life. It's easier for me to sort of push my way through that doubt and just, so I can get into the work I need to do. But there have been times when self-doubt has, really made me step away from a project for a while because I didn't feel capable of it, or even from writing itself for a while. There have been times where I've needed to step away from my own process, just, I think, to, as we say, fill up the well, but also because of doubt. And there have been ways I've had to kick myself in the butt to get back to the page. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I think, I don't know if I know any writer who doesn't grapple with self-doubt at times. And I think, unfortunately, it's an integral part of the journey. I do, however, feel more confident in calling myself a writer. That's something that, even though I've been writing since I was 4, I wasn't able to call myself a writer until I had won a national prize. And that's really, it makes me sad to think about that, because if you write, if you take writing seriously, you're a writer. You don't need to have that external recognition. But for me, I was very shy about it, even though writing was so important to me. And I would tell people, oh, I write, but I couldn't claim I am a writer. That was really hard to take that step. And I see that in my students. Students have a hard time claiming that term for themselves. And so I encourage everyone out there who does write, who takes it seriously, who finds satisfaction, creative gratification in it. You are a writer. We need to be okay with claiming that term, not just wait for someone to knight us with it.
No, I would agree. I remember there was a point, and I've shared this story a number of times, where I think that if somebody would say, oh, you're a journalist, I would say, no, I'm a writer. And then when they'd say, oh, you're a writer, well, I'm really just a hobbyist. And if they said I was a hobbyist, I'd say, well, I'm dabbling, really. And so there was these points, and I remember having a conversation with a dear friend who said, well, what would you have to write to just own the fact that you write? What does that mean? And I guess I had all these definitions in my head of what I needed to do in order to claim something. And I think it was probably just win a Pulitzer would probably be like the lone thing. So when you got this National Writing Award, was there sort of like an epiphany of like, oh, wait, I think maybe I'm actually this thing that I am?
Yeah, it gave me permission to claim it for myself. But again, I wish that it hadn't taken that to give me that permission. I wish I had given myself that permission earlier, because writing has been part of me pretty much my whole life. I have no memories before 4 years old. So as long as I can remember, I've been writing, and it's been a huge part of my identity and my way of being in the world. So I should have been calling myself a writer from the time I was a kid.
It's amazing how those kinds of things sort of stay with us for such a long time. So I kind of want to switch gears a little bit to the art of misdiagnosis. I've already said it 12 times, and I hope it's not embarrassing. It's wonderful. And I guess the main question is what, I mean, obviously, I don't want to say too much about the book, but it is about your mother's suicide and obviously how you dealt with it and the moments that led up to it and your understanding. Was it really a difficult thing? Like, did you feel like you had to write it, or was it something that was like bursting at the seams?
I did feel like I had to write it. Um, Writing has always been how I've been able to make sense of things in my own life and the world around me. And so I knew that writing would be the best way of processing this trauma. It was such a shocking experience, and I had just given birth 1 week before she took her own life. And so it was this really charged time of birth and death and joy and shock and trauma and grief. And excuse me. And I knew that writing would help me sort of come to a greater sense of clarity about what happened and what it meant to me. But I had actually been wanting to write about her even before her death. She had been delusional off and on the last 16 years of her life. And weirdly, her delusions were framed by my giving birth, because I have 3 kids which are very wide-ranging in age. I have a 27-year-old, a 24-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And when the 24-year-old was born, that's around the time that my mom's delusions began. And then she had her worst psychotic episode ever right around the time of my son's birth, my youngest son's birth. And so I had these 16 years framed by my giving birth of her being delusional, which was so confusing and so tricky to just figure out how to navigate. And she had asked me not to write about her while she was alive, because she knew I wanted to write about her, and I was aching to write about her. And in fact, I think that I started writing novels because I didn't know how to face my own story. Actually, I started writing novels after my daughter's birth, and for the longest time, I likened her birth to being just this creative floodgate that opened for me. And that's what I, sort of associated writing these novels with. But later it occurred to me that, this was also around the time my mom's delusions began. I didn't know how to tell my own story. I was told not to tell my own story by my mom. And so I started writing fiction. A lot of mother-daughter stories, I think, just as a way of, kind of processing my story in a sideways way. But then when she died, I thought, in the midst of all the confusion and pain, there was this one silver lining that now I can finally write about her. I felt, this real gratitude over the fact that at least I had the freedom to write about her, even though it was a horrible, painful, awful time. But then it wasn't so easy, because writing about trauma is hard. And I had just given birth, and so I was dealing with postpartum stuff and just having a baby on me 24 hours a day. And so it took longer for me to get to the writing than I thought it would. And I had to kind of tiptoe my way into it. I had to, it took me several years to be able to write the hardest scenes. I would just write the scenes that were coming to me that I felt ready to write, and slowly, kind of make my way into the harder stuff. But I knew that it was something I had to do. I had never felt a writing project to be as urgent as this one. It felt like it was saving my own life in a way, just because I was in rough shape after her death. It really did a number on me emotionally, and I kind of flailed around for a while, but the writing helped me so much. It allowed me to process, and then finding a way to turn my pain into something that I could call artful, finding a shape to contain something that felt so chaotic was really was so clarifying and cathartic and liberating for me.
I think it's wonderful how you did it. And so the story obviously is the relationship with your mother and dealing with her illness. Um, and at the same time, you're very upfront about your own failings, as it were, your own secrets, and you were very, very upfront with that. Was that always part of the story, or was that something that had evolved into the book?
Um, it became part of the story as I was writing it. And there's a thread in the book where I'm writing a letter to my mother. And that originally wasn't going to be part of the book. It was just something that my psychologist at the time suggested that I do. She thought that if I were to write a letter to my mom, it would be just helpful for me to clarify my feelings about her death and about our relationship. And so I was writing this letter just for myself. And in it, I was addressing our past together, and all of these, secret things were coming out. And at some point I realized, oh, I can thread this into the memoir, because I had been writing these present tense scenes kind of around the time of her death, trying to just capture that time, and just so I could remember it and be able to look at it with some clarity. But when you write in present tense, there wasn't really the chance for reflection. There wasn't really the opportunity to show what our past had been together. And so at some point I realized, oh, I could thread this letter into the narrative as a way of giving more context to what's happening around the time of her death, and to give a better window into our history together. And once I realized I had to do that, I realized I'm going to need to share, my own stuff. And I think that that's so important when we write memoir too, is if we're writing about someone difficult in our life, is to be as honest about ourselves and as sort of indicting of ourselves as we are of the other people. And I think you do that so beautifully in your forthcoming memoir. You're so honest about yourself, as well as looking at your dad. And I think that was done so beautifully, and I really appreciated your honesty. It's not easy to do, as you know, but for me it was, and I'll be curious to hear if you felt this way too, that in putting these things that had been my deepest, darkest secrets onto the page, just as like the year that I pretended to be sick as a teenager was for many years the scariest story that I held inside of me. And I was so scared to tell anyone about it, because I felt so ashamed about it and guilty and embarrassed. And it was truly my deepest, darkest secret. But once I was able to get it onto the page and share it with the world, it didn't feel as dark. It felt like, because I've released it from inside of me, because I'm not carrying it inside of me where it gains so much weight and pressure, that I just feel so much freer, and I feel like I don't have to hide, which is a really lovely feeling.
I completely agree with you. And one of the things that you just said that stuck out to me is that you took this information and you threaded it in.
Mm-hmm.
And which kind of makes it sound like it's almost easy. Like, oh, I'm just kind of an architect. I'm building this blueprint. I'll put a line here. Oh, there's a wall that goes there. And then we're done.
It
And
won't
so,
be easy. Yeah.
yeah. And so for me, like, and I'm saying that not like it was easy. Like for me, there was this point of the same kind of realization of like, oh, I need to go here with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I started writing it, there was this kind of sense of, and I don't know if this is your experience, but I think it's like fear is one of those things that the more you move towards it, the smaller it gets.
Yes. Yes.
And so when that was happening, it was like there was a certain liberation, and I have to at the same time go, oh, right. Like now it's on the page. Now what do I do? Because I went through periods where it was like, well, can I just hit the delete button on all of this stuff and just say my father was X? Was it, once you got it out, I mean, was there more work for you to do, just kind of like emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, where it was like, okay, this has to be it?
Yeah, it's, and the work continues, the emotional work continues. Um, I really thought, I kind of, a different kind of delusion than my mom, but I deluded myself into thinking, okay, you know, I got this out. It means I've processed it all and I'm fine now. I'll never have to worry about any of this ever. That delusion didn't last very long, because of course we still, we're still ourselves. And I thought that because I had written about my mom's death, I wouldn't feel grief anymore, or that I wouldn't feel confusion about her death anymore. And I certainly am in a much clearer place about it now, but the grief still comes back and, will knock the wind out of me. And I sort of hadn't thought that would happen. But, we're human and we have to keep feeling these things and processing them. And I definitely had to do a lot of psychological preparation just before the work went into the world, because it's a scary thing to expose such vulnerable stories. And I had to just get myself ready for that. And it's still hard. Like, bringing the book into the world was harder than I expected it would be, even though it was so gratifying. And that one of the most gratifying parts has been the stories that I've received as a result of putting my story in the world, where people have shared their stories with me in a way that maybe they haven't shared with other people. And so that's been such an honor to be able to bear witness to other people's stories, and to know that, our stories can be like a door that can open to people's own stories. And so that's amazing. But having the book in the world did stir up a lot of stuff for me. And I found myself dreaming about my mom for the first time in years, and I would wake up sobbing, and that hadn't happened, for ages. And I had a panic attack in a hotel room during my tour, and I've had maybe 2 of those before in my life. So it definitely stirred up more emotion than I expected, and I should have expected it. I don't know why I didn't. I thought, okay, because I've been facing this story so much on the page, it won't be hard to share it with the world. But it did take a toll on me emotionally, even though I'm so grateful for the experience. And it's been so incredibly meaningful and, gratifying as well.
And so the book is out now.
Yes.
Is it easier, or are you learning to cope with the stuff that comes up from the material and mom and all that?
Yeah, it definitely gets easier with time. I feel like I'm in a better place than I was when the book first came out in November, where I just felt like such a raw nerve walking around. Like, I just felt like I was walking around completely exposed to the wind, um, for the longest time. And I don't really feel that way now, even though, excuse me, even though it's still, it's the feelings are still there, but I can handle it better.
Good. I'm so glad that you wrote it. I'm glad that you wrote it, because I think it's such an admirable thing to write about really hard personal subjects, because we're in them, and it is just challenging.
It's challenging, but I think it's, this story had so much power over me, and my mom had so much power over me. And in writing this book, I was able to gain some power over the story. And that was really important for me.
So how did you, because probably the number one question that I get about memoir in general is like, how do you start? Where do you start? Obviously for me, it was like, I start with sort of like the absurdities, particular absurdities in my own story. Was that the driving force for you? Was your mother's suicide, or was there particular elements about your relationship? And what did that day look like? You know what I mean? To get started. Was it a daily process for you, or something else? Sorry that was like 9 questions at the same time.
Yeah, I've never been a daily writer, even though I go through periods where I do write every day, and that feels really good. And I always like it when I do write every day. But I find that sometimes I need to take time away from the page, or my life gets busy, but there's always stuff brewing inside of me.
Mm.
And sometimes I need to step away from the page so I can let things percolate up a little bit and bubble to the surface. And I honestly don't remember the day when I started writing it. I don't remember that day because I think it may have been when my son was about a year and a half old, something like that, and I started bringing in a babysitter a couple of times a week. And I thought that I would use that time to write, but I just couldn't do it for a while, and I would just work on grading student work and doing research and reading and stuff like that. And at some point, I think I started by writing scenes as they came to me, just whatever was most pressing inside of me. And I'm really grateful that I had the foresight to take notes around the time of my mother's death. I think I knew that I was going to want to write about it someday, and I knew that I might forget some of the little details. And so even though I don't keep a journal as a rule, although I wish I did write down as much as I could during the time it was happening, just so it could stay fresh. And I don't know if I was really aware of this consciously at the time, but later my sister told me that grief can really mess up our memories. It can it can create a kind of amnesia. And the same with giving birth. Giving birth can really mess with our memory too. And so I had a double whammy with the birth and death happening just right on top of each other. And so I'm super duper grateful that I had the presence of mind to take notes. And so I would look at these notes and I would see which ones would jump out at me, and then build a scene around those details, or a different memory would kind of emerge inside of me and I would write that down. And then as soon as I wrote something down, another one would bubble up. And it wasn't in chronological order or anything like that. I've never written in chronological order. I didn't know how these things were going to piece together necessarily, although I did know that the one thread around her death would be chronological, but I didn't write it in a chronological way. But it took me a while to figure out the form for the story because, as I mentioned, at some point I decided to incorporate this letter. At another point, I decided to transcribe the documentary my mom had been producing at the time of her death and weave that into the story. But it took a while, to find the right form for all of it. And in fact, even after I found a publisher, I ended up cutting a quarter of the book to make it tighter, because I had this epiphany after I found a home. My editor asked me to cut 3,000 to 7,000 words, just so the book would be shorter, so it would be cheaper to print. Because you have to think about things like that. And she didn't really give me any guidance as to what to cut, because we were going to start the more intensive editing process after I cut whatever I chose to cut. And once I started cutting, I realized that there was so much that didn't need to be there. And I had this epiphany that the center of the book wasn't about my breaking my own silences and finding my voice, which is what I thought the book was about. I realized, no, this book is about my relationship with my mom and trying to make peace with that. And so all of the things that were related to my journey that weren't about my mom at all, that had felt important to me to write, I cut because they didn't feed the central focus of the story as I came to realize what it was supposed to be. And so I cut a full quarter of the book after that. And I used to hate cutting stuff from my work because it was so hard won. And this book especially, every word was so hard won. But cutting those 20,000 words, 20 plus thousand words, was really freeing. And I know it made the book much better. And even though those words were important for me to write, they weren't important for the reader to be able to understand the journey.
I think that what you just said in terms of the catharsis element of writing your work, and then also being mindful of the reader's process as well is I think it's a crucial one.
Yeah.
Looking back, was there anything that you cut that was like, maybe that should have been in there?
um, Actually, no, I'm fine with everything I cut. And some of it I've published separately as standalone essays. So some of it has had a life outside of the book. And that's been fine. Some of it no one will see but me. And I guess my agent and editor saw it, and whoever else, friends and family who read earlier drafts. But the general reading public doesn't need to see those words. They were important for me to write, but they don't need them. And yeah, so when you talk about writing for ourselves versus writing for the reader, for me it was that first draft was so much just for me, and I didn't really think about the reader until I started revising. So all the drafts after that first cathartic draft were really for the reader in terms of how do I make this clearer? How do I make this stronger for the reader? How do I make this a more satisfying journey for them?
So I think you've given already a lot of really wonderful information for somebody who's considering a similar path in terms of their own writing in writing memoir. Is there a particular tip that was given to you that was useful, that you clung to or used a lot, or something that was like, oh, wow, I didn't know this, but boy, that would have been helpful?
That's a good question. One thing that stuck with me a lot as I was writing was a quote, and it's not even a quote about writing, but it's a quote from Brené Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability. And she said that an early definition of the word courage is to tell one's story with all one's heart. And I love that. And it makes sense because core, means heart, but I'd never thought about that word courage being connected to storytelling. And so that's something that has really spoken to me. And I just remind myself, have courage. And in that courage, just tell my story with all my heart. Don't hold anything back. And that's something I'm sure I've heard this from other writers too, but that's something I encourage writers to do, is just get it all down. Just don't hold anything back. You might have to cut, a bunch of it as I did, but if you hold back, then, the reader can feel it, I think, when we're not being fully honest. Not that we can put everything on the page, because of course we have to make decisions about what to include and what to leave out. But if there's something that you feel like, maybe I should explore that, just go for it. Just get it all out there. Have courage. Write your story with all your heart. And then later you can shape it into something that will touch another person's heart.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. Do you have, or who are the writers that inspire you? Is there somebody that's sort of like, wow, they get me?
There are so many. I would say that as I was writing this book, there were some particular writers that really helped guide the way for me. Lydia Yuknavitch and her memoir, The Chronology of Water, was very important for me, just in terms of seeing how raw she was and honest with her work, and also how inventive with form she was, how she just doesn't let herself be boxed into any traditional structure. She was really important for me. Roxane Gay's work has been really influential for me. I love how she's able to weave together really deeply personal stuff with also really insightful observations about the world. So she looks within and without at the same time. Emily Rapp is someone who writes about grief really powerfully, and so her work was very inspiring for me. Leslie Jameson's essays, I think, like Roxane Gay, she does a beautiful job of looking inside and outside at the same time. And then, of course, I have a lot of favorite poets who, since I started as a poet when I was 4, poets always have a great influence upon me. Sharon Olds is one who had a real influence on me from college. when I was first introduced to her work. She really gave me permission to be more honest about just living in my body and being able to put that onto the page. Oh, there's so many more, but
but that's why I think why we're writers is because we love the written word,
yes.
and because there's a lot of people who inspire us and really bring us to a place of love and honesty, and I think that's fantastic. So, if somebody wants to get The Art of Misdiagnosis, is it kind of everywhere?
It's your favorite bookstore. If they don't have it, request it. It's I always like to push the indie bookstores. So if you have a great indie bookstore in your neighborhood, that's the best thing. You can look at IndieBound online to find, order from an independent bookstore online, but it's also at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, all of those places.
Right. So that's indiebound.com, correct?
Yeah, yes, I believe so. But just wherever you most like to buy your books, it should be there.
And so if somebody just wants to contact you or learn more about what you're doing, are you still on tour?
I'm not. I'm finally done with touring, although I'll probably do more in the fall when the paperback comes out, but those dates haven't been set yet. I do have a local event next week at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I'll be giving a keynote and teaching a workshop at the Willamette Writers Conference in Oregon in August.
Do you have those dates or any websites where, in case somebody's local when they want to see you?
Yeah, that's August 3rd through 5th. I have not put it on my own website yet, but it will be up there eventually. But if you look up Willamette Writers Conference, you can find that. And hopefully I'll update my website soon, but people can certainly visit it to be able to contact me or find out more about my other books. It's just www.GayleBrandeis.com, GayleBrandeis.
That is fantastic. Gayle, this has been so much fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Devin. I'm so grateful.
No, thank you. This was like, you are so smart and insightful. I cannot recommend your book strongly enough. So I hope people are going to run out and get it. It really is a wonderful piece of writing, in terms of storytelling and in terms of depth of challenge that you overcome and your vulnerability and honesty. I think it really is a wonderful work. So anyway, for everybody who's watching, by the way, if you happen to see this, make sure you hit a like button and share it and tell your friends, and absolutely visit GayleBrandeis.com. Again, that is GayleBrandeis. And so that's what we've got today for this episode of Writing Daily. Again, Gayle, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
and
thank you so much.
And
everyone needs to read your memoir too when it comes out in September, because it's wonderful.
Thank you so much, Gayle. I appreciate it. And so anyway, that's what we've got for today, because we're all about writing daily. We do the best that we can, and we keep throwing it out there as writers because it's something that's in us, and we need to just go for it. We go for it, and we just keep trying our best. Anyway, that's what I've got for today. Thank you so much, and I will look forward to seeing you guys all again tomorrow with Writing Daily.